Welcome to CapitolView, the weekly program where we talk about state politics and government and how it might just affect you. Joining me this week on CapitolView is Peter Hancock, reporter for Capitol News, Illinois. Welcome, Mr. Hancock.
Good to see you, Bruce.
Also, Dave Dahl, longtime State House reporter for WTAX Radio. And thank you, Dave, for wearing a mask. It's a message we all need to appreciate. Thank you.
It's all about your safety, Bruce. Thanks.
Well, and that's why we're doing it the way we're doing it this week. Let's get right into it. Michael Madigan, Speaker of the House, in deep apparent doo-doo by some calculations and perhaps not by others. He has been tabbed by federal prosecutors as perhaps being involved in a bribery scheme involving ComEd, which has pleaded guilty to bribing folks in exchange for legislative favors.
They didn't exactly plead guilty. They're in a deferred prosecution agreement.
My mistake.
Which at the ICC hearing earlier this week, it was made quite clear that they've been convicted of nothing. It's merely a deferred prosecution agreement where if they keep their nose clean, it all goes away.
Really? That reminds me somewhat.
Like they're in shock.
Yeah. No, it reminds me somewhat. Let's go in the Wayback Machine to 2014 when House Speaker Michael Madigan had been caught up in a scandal involving Metra, in which he was alleged to have pressured Metra to give favored job positions to folks to whom he favored. And nothing was untoward, at least officially, was found as a result of that investigation. However, at the time, the Inspector General for the Legislative Office in a report said, quote, Madigan should have realized, given his influential position, that by making the requests at the conclusion of meetings with Metro officials to discuss funding and other legislative issues, he would be creating reciprocal expectations. This unhealthy situation was exacerbated by the subsequent communications to Metro by the Speaker or persons associated with him, inquiring as to the state of the promotion requests when favorable action was not forthcoming. That is what the Legislative Inspector General wrote 6 years ago. How different is that really from what we're seeing now?
Well, do you think the Speaker got to where he is by not knowing every little detail about everything? On the other hand, prove it. Burden of proof is on the prosecutors, and so far they haven't gotten anything on him. Yeah, otherwise they'd have indicted him for something by now.
You're exactly right, Dave. The burden of proof is on the prosecution, and it should be. That said, there is criminal law, there's civil law, and there's also politics. And what we're seeing now probably eclipses the Metro scandal, which I just spoke. It involved the same sorts of things, giving favored jobs and favored positions to insiders. It's kind of the same thing. Nothing happened 6 years ago. Madigan survived, but this time, some Democrats are starting to say no mas. We've had State Senator Heather Steins. I'm sorry if I'm terrible at pronouncing names. She's saying
it's like what you spilled on your shirt. Stains.
Thank you so much. She has said, gotta go. So have two more importantly, Democratic members of the State House of Representatives. This seems to me to be perhaps different. I'm not sure that we've seen this sort of I don't want to call it revolt or honest reaction from Democratic representatives. Can this make a difference?
Well, Bruce, I think there does seem to have been a significant shift in the politics of Chicago, and I think it was most evident last year with the election of Lori Lightfoot as mayor, sweeping all 40 wards or however many wards there are up there, and running against, the chairwoman of the Cook County Democratic Party, and Lightfoot herself being a former federal prosecutor. So I think the politics of Chicago is changing. And I think some Chicago area politicians are starting to notice that. And this being an election year, I think Madigan is kind of radioactive at this point. And it's not surprising to me to see people kind of stepping back and getting their distance from him.
Well, if you're a member,
I'm sorry, go ahead, Dave.
if you're a member of the House Democratic Caucus, in the past, you can't live without him. And I think what a few of the members are saying is, yeah, we can, and we want to. He shouldn't be our leader because he's damaged. And as Senator Staines said, innocent till proven guilty should not be the standard for a leader. He should be held to a higher standard, and he should step down.
I think radioactive is perhaps an apt term, but he's not radioactive in terms necessarily of folks who might count in the end, which is to say, in the last week, he's received in excess of $900,000 in political contributions from 2 organized labor groups based, I believe, in Chicago. If this guy is damaged goods, if he's so useless, if his reputation and effectiveness is beyond repair, why are labor unions contributing as much money as they've contributed in the last 2 weeks?
It might be a question for Senator Staines or Representative Kifowit or any of the others who've said they got to get him out of there. And by the way, just before we went to tape, the House Minority Leader, Jim Durkin, also said he's got to get out of there. And I'm sure Durkin will bring all of the power and influence that he can bear to the situation, which is to say not a lot. He's in a super minority.
Mm-hmm.
Nevertheless, obviously not everybody thinks that Madigan's useless. And by the way, you don't make campaign contributions just to send your favorite guy or gal, Springfield or Washington, make a campaign contribution so you'll get their attention. So they'll return your call.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just think, it's important to remember that Madigan still controls a very strong organization, volunteers who can go knocking on doors, turning out the vote. And, for a long time, it's been very difficult for anyone to get elected as a Democrat unless you were on the program, as they say, which is to say receiving money from Madigan's organization and in exchange, pledging your allegiance to Michael Madigan.
Yeah. I mean, Governor Pritzker, let's talk about him for a second. He has in the past said, if you come under this level of scrutiny where you're publicly identified by prosecutors as tainted goods, as perhaps of having broken the law, you should step down. He said that, I believe, within the last year. He's not saying that now about Michael Madigan. And even perhaps more intriguing, maybe it's me, but the Pritzker administration also recently moved to dissolve a federal consent decree created almost 50 years ago to keep patronage politics out of government, out of state government in Illinois. He says it's no longer needed. After almost 50 years, it's been 6 years since you busted someone. How does that look?
Well, not very good. I think, and anybody who thinks we've solved the problem of patronage politics in Illinois is probably just not looking in the right place. But the governor has the right to do that. I don't know that federal prosecutors are going to go along with that. We'll just have to see how that plays out.
Looks like Illinois is what it looks like.
I think you're right, Dave. It looks exactly like Illinois. 6 years clean is a clean bill of health. That's what Pritzker is saying. And meanwhile, the governor also is under scrutiny with regard to property tax breaks.
Yeah, toilets.
Yeah, toilets. That has not gone away. Toilets are toilets. And he apparently had paid the money back without any admittance that he had done anything wrong. The governor also, early in his administration, said, you know what? I'm not just going to go with the regular government employees, the civil servants that are delivered to prior governors. I'm going to pay them extra out of my own pocket so that I can make sure I get the best and the brightest.
Yeah, double.
Yeah, paying them double.
Double the salaries of, I think, 20 people.
Who are they
Top 20.
beholden? Yeah, who are they beholden to now? The people of the state of Illinois or Governor Pritzker?
Well, I
Yes.
think when you work in the governor's office, you're beholden to the governor. There's no question about that. And no matter how much you're being paid, you serve at the pleasure of the governor.
Yeah. It seems to me that we do have, I mean, everything is interconnected to some degree, politics and policy and whatnot. We have on the ballot a measure pushed by the governor to create a progressive income tax. This comes plopping down, and we have this history. We have the governor under federal scrutiny, which has not gotten as much attention, I think, as Michael Madigan has. What does this do? The governor had been asked about this, I think, a couple days ago. How does this kind of how do these kinds of developments touch on your move to establish a progressive income tax? He didn't directly, I thought, answer the question. So, Dave, what do you think? How might that impact it?
I think it shows that, not a lot's changed. People are cynical about government. And it seems like no matter who's in office, we've got plenty of reason to be. It's plenty of material. And as I've said before, we didn't get here by believing everything we're told. But I think any idea that Governor Pritzker is that different or that he's above that kind of stuff, if you put stock in that, you're being disappointed.
Yeah. I think perhaps there had been this expectation or hope, given what has happened in prior administrations with prior governors. Nobody went to jail under Rauner's administration. I mean, that's a point well taken. But prior administrations, I mean, Quinn had patronage in IDOT. Blagojevich went to prison. Ryan went to prison. It's just been this history of lousy governors in the state of Illinois, going back some time. And we wanted this breath of fresh air. And I think in some circles, perhaps there is a hope that the governor would more resoundingly speak up and actually do stuff and use his bully pulpit. And he has done to some extent. He got John Sullivan. He dismissed John Sullivan or forced his resignation from the Department of Agriculture. But that's small potatoes compared to this. If you're the governor,
was that even necessary, Bruce? Was it necessary for him to fire John Sullivan?
Well, the person who gave Forrest Ashby, the infamous apparatchik, apparently, who had gotten in trouble, who had kept his mouth shut about the quote unquote rape in Champaign, was given, I think, a $60,000 or $70,000 no bid contract to consult for the state law enforcement safety and standards board. And the director of the board who gave him that contract has suffered no repercussions. It seems situational, I think, maybe, at least to some folks. And if you're the governor of Illinois, what do you do now to clean the slate? Is there anything you can do to clean the slate? Can you say, is talk enough, or do you take action? If so, what?
Well, I think the question is, to what extent does that sort of stuff bleed over into what you were talking about earlier, the ballot measure on the progressive income tax? That measure, as near as I can tell, and I'm not a pollster, but my general sense is that that is walking on its own legs. There seems to be considerable public support for that. Yeah, maybe the governor, before taking office, took some steps to lower his own property tax bill. That doesn't seem, I don't get the sense that people think that's a capital offense. On the other hand, getting back to Michael Madigan, putting through legislation that allowed a utility company to get automatic rate increases without having necessarily to go through the Illinois Commerce Commission. Citizens Utility Board estimates that since that went into effect, they've gotten about $700 million in additional revenue as a result of that law. They're paying a $200 million fine.
I don't mean to interrupt, Peter. You're making good points, but the fine was $200 million, and they made $700 million. Go ahead.
Yeah. And it's just the appearance that he was able to use this huge utility company as an ATM for his own political pals. And, used it as, a tool to stay in power and to reward those who were loyal to him. And that goes beyond taking out some toilets to lower your own personal property tax bill.
This comment thing, I think, is going to be fairly easy, a bite-sized piece for voters to remember, if they put enough advertising money behind it. Bribes for laws that favor big energy. And that's about all you have to remember. And, so I'll tie any Democrat to that.
Okay. Well, ComEd isn't the only, those are excellent points, Peter. I mean, would you invest $200 million if there was $500 million net to be made? Of course you would. And so the question of whether punishment has been as it should be, I think is a fair one to ask. ComEd and Madigan aren't the only things in the news. Of course, we have COVID. This week here in Springfield, where we're broadcasting from, the State Department of Revenue, or excuse me, not the State Department of Revenue, Illinois State Board of Elections is shut down due to a COVID outbreak. Cases are on the uptick. And then both teachers unions in Illinois Education Association and the Illinois Federation of Teachers has put out a statement saying in no uncertain terms, pretty much, we're going to decide whether schools open and to what extent. Because if we don't think it's safe, we'll go to any and all means necessary, including a strike, to keep our members safe. A lot to consider here. A lot of folks are thinking about schools reopening. The governor has essentially said no high school sports, no high school football this fall. As cases continue to go up, the governor also has indicated that perhaps, his administration has indicated that perhaps we might have to be more restrictive, go back a steps. Is this what are the tea leaves saying here? Are we going to go back from where we're at now? Go ahead, Dave.
I think coronavirus is still out there. I don't think it's abated. I think we're only opening things up because we're bored, because we want to get out. We're tired of not making money. We're tired of not being in business. And I think that's driving it all instead of any actual reduction in coronavirus. Everywhere it's opened up, including Illinois, the numbers continue to go up. So if I'm not overly, but if I'm afraid of going to work and catching the Rona, if I'm a school teacher, you can't blame the unions for saying, we don't want any part of this until it's safe. And is it safe now? Teachers say no.
Yeah, and working conditions have always been the subject of collective bargaining. Student-teacher ratios, what kind of equipment salaries, the hours that you work. These have always been subject to collective bargaining. What you have now is, working conditions that can kill you if they aren't handled properly. And I think the unions are just reasserting their right to bargain on these things because they want to be safe. They walk into a classroom, they're exposing themselves to risk. If they catch the virus from a kid, they take it home to their own families. I mean, there's a lot to be concerned about here. And I just think the unions are reasserting their right to collectively bargain working conditions.
I mean, certainly the statement was ma and apple pie. I mean, as you suggest, Peter, it was these are fundamental bedrock issues, and why unions exist is to keep people safe. And this comes in the wake of a fairly modest demonstration outside the Capitol within the past week, where folks demonstrated in favor of sending their kids to school without masks. Saying,
the Million Unmasked March.
The Million Unmasked March, and
I was there.
No, I thought, from a personal standpoint, I'm all in favor of choice. And so it's your choice to send your kids to school or not if they're not going to wear a mask. And so, but teachers are seeing, I think, this sort of a stance for and against masks. And something like, I think the latest polls I saw, something like 11% of people in the United States still don't wear masks. They say they're, for whatever reason, they're not doing it. It's perhaps understandable if teachers would feel a bit shy about returning to the classroom with those numbers. In terms of sports, I was struck by the governor having to take a stance in this with regard to, are we going to play sports? Why isn't this a decision on some level, I wonder, that couldn't be handled on a more local level? Apparently, it can't be handled on a more local level. What does that say about where we're at in terms of the virus and government's ability to get folks to do what they should be doing? Is this a governmental function, or is it beyond the power of government to do anything?
Well, somebody doesn't trust the locals to make the decision on their own whether football should be played or not. I think maybe the governor was just afraid that some school would play football. And meanwhile, some of the downstate people, like Congressman Darren LaHood of this area, said the governor made a one-size-fits-all decision, and they should do it regionally because some places are more susceptible to coronavirus than others. When you're talking about football and all that entails, being close to people and, sweating on each other and hitting each other,
No.
Is that a regional thing? I mean, you're just as close to a football player in Cairo as you are in Chicago if you're playing football. But nevertheless, I think it shows that, once again, the governor doesn't trust local people to make what he thinks to be the right decision.
Yeah.
Well, I differ a little bit there. I don't think this should be a local decision. I don't think it should be a state decision. There should be a national strategy for responding to the COVID-19 pandemic, and we don't really have one. Someone who plays on the Springfield High football team doesn't spend his entire life in Springfield. They travel around, and that's how this virus has become a pandemic. It's traveled the globe. And there needs to be a national and a global strategy for combating this, and we just don't have that.
And I mean, I think it's interesting when the governor issued his, here's what we're going to do about sports, he divided it almost into tiers as to low, medium, high risk sports. Golf, that's not very high risk. Football and lacrosse, that is high risk. Volleyball, baseball, that kind of falls somewhere in between, which is somewhat interesting given that the Florida Marlins now are down for the count, having something like 14 or 15 members of their team having tested positive, and that's baseball, which the governor puts at somewhat of a lower risk than other sports. I think, again, Peter, your point is well taken. Governors are, not just here, but in all 50 states, are struggling with how to handle it within their own jurisdiction. One thing I think that Illinois and Pritzker can point to is, so far compared to other states, while we're seeing an uptick, it has not been as bad as we've seen in California, which has seen a resurgence. It's not as bad in some of these other states. And so how much of a feather in the cap is that for Pritzker? And again, everything can change. But that, so far so good. I was early on, and that's paid benefits.
I think the general assessment is that Pritzker has done a pretty good job. The positivity rate, if you look at the number of tests that are being conducted and how many of them come back positive, it's still a notch below 4%. In Florida, it's up in the teens.
Right.
So we have done a better job in Illinois of containing it. But that positivity rate is starting to inch back up, and that is very concerning. And, kids are going to go back to school. The thing about the difference between football and baseball, maybe baseball is a little safer because one of the key strategies of baseball is to not get touched. But, while the game is different, the locker rooms are not different. The kids are in the locker rooms. They're close to one another. It's dangerous, and it has to be part of the strategy. I mean, sports is a big part of American culture, and it's painful to have to do that. But people can die if you don't.
Yeah. And as we've seen again at the Illinois State Board of Elections, that's closed down. They've had 2 positive tests. And I'm not sure that they play baseball on the parking lot of the Illinois State Board of Elections. I mean, we're seeing cases now, at least again from Sangamon County, from where we're broadcasting, and the virus has been in all 102 counties now. There's not a county that's been exempted from this. And it's hard to know what the future will hold. And absent a national strategy, I guess the Pritzker administration will have to muddle on as best they can. And speaking of muddling on as best we can, we are out of time. And so thanks again, everybody, for joining us for Capitol View. And we'll see you again next week.